Welcome to our first unit, The Journey. In this initial section, we will explore what it means to begin the journey, which is the image and metaphor we saw Benedict use in the prologue. Benedict said, "We set out on this way with the gospel for our guide. But first, we need to explore what this way is and who Benedict was writing for. We are reading a rule for monks, and so we want to know what it means to be a monk. We will begin by stretching our concept and definition of monk and start to look at what monasticism means for people outside of a traditional monastery. Since we are studying Benedict's rule for monks, we'll look at what a monastic rule is and how it might apply to us. We will also take a brief look at the historical roots of monasticism to see how our foremothers and forefathers in faith began to develop the movement we know as monasticism. Benedict talks about progressing on this way, and so we want to look at how we grow and develop throughout our life stages. The insights of psychology will help us to understand the context for where we are on our journey. As we understand how faith changes over the life cycle, we may begin to see why we have felt called to this particular program at this particular time in our life. We will also begin to reinterpret some of the key concepts and values of Benedict's understanding of monastic life and translate them into more modern psychological terms that will help us interpret Benedict's 6th century worldview into terms we are more comfortable with. Let's begin. First, what is a monk? If you ask the average person on the street, you would probably hear images of men in strange long robes who keep silence while living in medieval buildings, living lives of great austerity. Some people might mention that monks are members of religious orders in the Roman Catholic Church. Most people's ideas about monks focus on differentness, detachment, asceticism, and institutional religion. Very few, if any, people walking down the street would call themselves monks. But perhaps there is much more to this word monk than we usually think of. Although there is a narrow historical or institutional definition of a monk as a historical figure from the Middle Ages or a man in certain Catholic religious orders, we will define monk much more broadly. Perhaps a monk is a person who desires to seek God above all else in life. This person, man or woman, is someone for whom the traditional understanding of practice of religion isn't enough. Simply going to church, leading a good moral life, believing the tenets of one's faith, does not seem sufficient. When there is a deep hunger, a longing, a yearning for God that is not satisfied by the ordinary practice of faith, then we are beginning to arrive in the territory of monasticism, the archetype or pattern of the monk. We know that for many people, faith or spirituality is simply not part of their life. For some people, it may not make sense to them, or may even seem irrelevant or silly. For still other people, faith means clear belief in the teachings of a faith tradition or a particular church, along with regular attendance at church services, and that for them is sufficient. They don't feel a need for anything more. But for some of us, the desire for God is not so easily satisfied or fed. For some, there is a deep sense that there must be something more, that our awareness of God is not limited to Sunday morning. It is not limited to a set of beliefs or practices, but instead our entire being longs to know God more deeply. Throughout history, there have been men and women for whom ordinary faith is not enough. A minority who have lived a faith that was all-encompassing, rather than simply being one part of who they are. Across time, across cultures, there have always been those called to seek God above all else. This is a phenomenon that one scholar of religion has called the monastic archetype. An archetype is a pattern or model that transcends time and culture. To say that the monk is an archetype means that in every time and place there are people who have lived lives in which God was their ultimate quest and aim, the abiding longing that compelled them deeper into lives of faith. This phenomenon of monasticism seems to exist in some form in most of the world's religions. It is very well developed in Christianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism, and in other religions there are always those who stand out within the culture for their dedication to their faith and their need and willingness to go beyond the ordinary demands of their faith. The word itself, monk, comes from the Greek monos, meaning single or alone. Historically, the word was used originally to describe hermits who lived alone. But today, perhaps the word can be seen as describing a different kind of singleness or aloneness, the singleness of purpose of those who seek God, who long for God alone, for God above all else. This is the journey of a monk. So now it's time to pause and ask yourself, are you a monk? Can you explain why or why not? This question isn't simply meant to be a test of whether you've been listening to this video. We are going to suggest that being a monk is a deep call of the heart, an identity that is grounded in the desire for God. Being a monk is a call that transcends the limitations of institutions and history. It is a call that resonates in the depth of the heart. It is a call that we will continue to explore in the months ahead. Now for your next week's assignment, participate in the discussion thread on Nicenet. Read the assignment, which is listed on the schedule, which is the preface and first chapter from Michael Casey's Strangers to the City. Then next week we will have a short overview of monastic history.